She came back to herself in pieces. First the pain, a low, diffuse ache behind her eyes that sharpened the moment she tried to open them. Then the smell, salt air, iron rust, something organic and wrong underneath it all, like meat left too long in a warm place. Then the sound of wind moving through structures that weren't trees. Structures that clicked and hummed with a frequency that no human architecture had ever produced. Sergeant First Class Mara Voss, United States Army Special Forces, formerly of the 10th Mountain Division, and more recently of a program that didn't appear anywhere in any unclassified document, opened her eyes. The sky above her was wrong. Not the color. It was close enough to blue, a deep indigo at the upper reaches, fading towards something amber near the horizon. But the movement in it was wrong. Clouds that spiraled inward instead of drifting. Two moons, one half visible in daytime, and threading between them, distant and slow and enormous, the dark shapes of something that was not a bird. She sat up. She was on a beach. The sand was black. The ocean, or what she'd assumed was ocean, was a deep copper color, still as glass except where small waves lapped at the shore with a sound that was almost right. Almost. There was an extra syllable in each wave's rhythm, a soft harmonic that the water made when it pulled back, like something breathing beneath the surface. Mara put her hand to her neck. Her pulse was there, fast but steady. She ran a systems check on her own body the way she'd been trained, working from extremities inward. Fingers, toes, knee, which had a new ache she didn't remember acquiring, ribs, intact. A soreness in the crook of her left arm that she recognized immediately. Injection site. She pulled up her sleeve. The mark was already fading, but it was there. A neat puncture, no bruising. Professional. Whoever had taken her had known what they were doing. She looked at her wrists next. No rope marks. They hadn't needed to restrain her. Whatever they'd given her had been enough. She stood slowly and turned in a full circle. The beach curved away in both directions. Behind her, several hundred meters inland, structures rose from the black rock, towers of a material she had no name for, semi-translucent and faintly luminescent even in daylight. Between them, cables of what looked like living tissue. Strung taut, trembling slightly in the wind, and at the edge of the structures, visible even from this distance, figures moving. Tall figures. Wrong-proportioned figures. Moving with the particular deliberateness of something that was not in a hurry because it had never needed to be. She was not alone on the beach. 20 meters to her left, a man was beginning to stir. He was big, not military big, but naturally large, with the broad build of someone who'd done hard physical work for decades. He wore clothes that didn't match, as though someone had dressed him from a random sample of human clothing, and there was a fresh injection mark on his arm, too. He came up swearing, which struck Mara as a reasonable response to the situation. "Easy," she said. He looked at her. He had a square jaw, a broken nose, and eyes that were doing the same rapid environmental scan hers had just done. She recognized that assessment reflex. Whoever he was, he'd been trained somewhere. "Where is this?" he said. Not a question. More like statement of the problem. "Working on it," she said. "What's your name?" "Cole." He pushed himself to his feet, checked his own body the same way she had. Methodical, top to bottom. Injection site, left arm. "Mine too. You military?" "Was." "You?" "Close enough." He turned and looked at the towers. "Those aren't human." "No, so," he breathed out slowly. "Aliens, looks like." He was quiet for a moment. She appreciated that. She'd been in situations before with people who needed to process shock out loud, in long rambling sentences, and there was a time and place for that, and this wasn't it. "Anyone else?" he asked. She pointed further down the beach. Two more shapes were becoming visible, one already upright, one still prone. And beyond them, barely visible at the far curve of the shore, another figure picking her way carefully through the black sand. "5 of us at least," Mara said. "They put us here on purpose." "Yes, why?" She looked at the injection site on her arm again, thought about the professionalism of it, the clean puncture, the measured dose, thought about the towers and the figures moving between them, and the cables that connected the structures like a nervous system. "I don't know yet," she said. "But whoever is running this operation has a logistics structure. You don't build all that." She gestured at the towers. "For 5 people, unless 5 people have a specific value to you." "Or unless 5 people are a starting batch," Cole said. She looked at him. "I've seen organ farms," he said, "human ones. In Eastern Europe. Each small groups. You don't want them to panic each other." The copper ocean lapped against the black sand. Something hummed in the towers, a vibration she felt in her back teeth. "Then we need to move fast," Mara said, "before they're ready for us." The man who came from the far end of the beach was named Darrow. He was young, mid-20s, lean, with the particular look of someone who had spent significant time being afraid and had organized that fear into something functional. He'd been awake longest, and he'd already done a reconnaissance of the shoreline. "There are more," he said. He kept his voice low, though there was no obvious reason to. The figures in the towers hadn't moved. 9 of us total. 3 unconscious still. He stopped. I counted the marks in the sand, where someone was dragged. Mara followed his eyes. Between the tree line and the beach, the black sand was disturbed in several places. Not footprints, drag marks. "How long ago?" she asked. "Sand's dry. Wind's been filling them in. Couple hours maybe. They already took someone. 3 someones." Cole made a sound low in his throat. The group assembled itself over the next 20 minutes. Besides Mara, Cole, and Darrow, there was a woman named Celine, a structural engineer from Bucharest who'd been on a research vessel, which explained nothing and everything, and an old man who gave his name as Rook and refused to explain anything about himself, but who moved through the alien shoreline environment with a calm that Mara recognized as a different kind of training. An older kind. 9 had arrived. 6 remained. 3 had already been taken by the things in the towers. "We have one advantage," Mara told them, when they'd gathered in a tight circle away from the visible sight lines of the structures. "They don't think we're dangerous. Whatever they're here for, they don't see us as a threat. That's why there are no restraints. That's why they're not watching the beach." "How do you know they're not watching?" Celine asked. "I've been watched by people who wanted to control me," Mara said. "It has a texture. You can feel it. There's nobody on those towers looking at us right now. We're livestock to them. You don't watch livestock, you just manage the logistics." "Then we change that," Cole said. "We change that," Mara agreed. The first thing they needed was intelligence. Mara had been in enough situations where charging toward the objective without understanding it had cost lives, her own people's lives. Lives she still saw sometimes when she woke at 3 in the morning. So before anything else she went to look. She went alone. Not because she didn't trust the others. She didn't trust them yet. Hadn't had the time to earn that trust in either direction. But because one person moving quietly through uncertain terrain left one set of footprints, one set of sounds, one shadow. The structures up close were less alien and more simply large. The material was something like crystal and something like bone, semi-translucent, shot through with bioluminescent veining that pulsed slowly. The cables she'd seen from the beach were exactly what she'd suspected. Organic, warm to the touch when she pressed her fingers against one carefully. They trembled. Not from the wind. She moved through the outer edge of the installation and found what she was looking for within 4 minutes. A room, open-walled, facing inland, shaped like an amphitheater with the curved seating, occupied by equipment she couldn't name arranged in rows. On tables at the center of the room, 3 humans lay unconscious, unrestrained, connected to machines by filaments that emerged from their skin without apparent injury. She'd been right about the organ harvesting. Wrong about the specific mechanism. They weren't taking organs. They were taking something else. Something Mara had no word for, because human science hadn't isolated it yet. She could see it. A faint luminescence, being drawn through the filaments and into the machines. A light that she intuitively understood came from something the humans were producing at a cellular level. Something the harvesting machines were collecting the way you'd collect sap from a tree. One of the figures moved through the room below her. Mara pressed herself flat against the crystal wall and watched. It was tall, nearly 3 meters. Bipedal, but with an extra joint in each limb that gave its movement a quality, like watching something move through water. Its skin was the color of old ash, and had a texture like overlapping scales, each one catching and scattering the light differently. Its head was elongated, with sensory organs Mara couldn't map to any human equivalent arrayed around a face that was largely featureless. No mouth that she could see, no eyes. It moved through the room with total confidence. It didn't look at the humans on the tables. They weren't people to it. That, Mara thought, was the second advantage. If they didn't think of you as people, they didn't think of you as threats. And if they didn't think of you as threats, they made the oldest mistake in the book. They stopped imagining what you were capable of. She had grown up in a town where the only map anybody used was 15 years out of date, where the nearest hospital was a 4-hour drive, where everybody knew how to gut a deer and fix an engine and argue effectively because those were survival skills. She had joined the army at 19 and spent the next 16 years learning how to break things, and how to put them back together, and how to make weapons out of whatever was at hand. She had fought in 4 conflicts, been decorated in 3 of them, and been the last person standing in situations where the mathematics of survival had been entirely against her. The thing moving through the room below had never dealt with anything like her. She backed away from the wall slowly, carefully, and went to tell the others what she'd found. Cole had been busy in her absence. He'd organized the remaining survivors by skill set, with the flat efficiency of someone who had done this before, and had found that among them they had one former soldier, Mara, one person with construction and structural engineering knowledge, Celine, one young man who was terrified but had grown up maintaining the fishing boats his family owned in the North Atlantic and understood mechanical systems intuitively, Darrow, and Rook, who turned out to have been a chemist before he was whatever he was now. Cole himself had been a firefighter for 20 years before becoming something else that he still wasn't explaining. "Firefighters useful," Mara said. "I know how things burn," he said, "and how they don't." She told them what she'd seen. She described the harvesting apparatus, the filaments, the light being drawn out of the unconscious humans. She described the beings themselves, their height, their build, their sensory configuration, their confidence. Celine listened with her arms folded and her jaw set. When Mara finished, she said, "The organic cabling, the pulsing, that's a living infrastructure. The whole installation is probably integrated. If you cut the right connection, the whole thing destabilizes." "Like cutting a load-bearing wall," Darrow said. "Exactly like that. But you need to find the right wall." "I can find it," Celine said. "If I can get close enough." "I can get you close enough," Mara said. Rook had been quiet through all of this. He was sitting in the black sand with his back to a rock formation, looking at nothing in particular. When Mara glanced at him, he said, without looking up, "The filaments. They were drawing something out." "Yes, and that something was luminescent." "Yes. And you said the creatures themselves scatter light differently depending on which scale catches it." Mara paused. "Yes, they're harvesting biophotons," Rook said. "Human cells produce them as a byproduct of metabolic processes. It's not unique to humans, but the human rate of production is, apparently, unusual. We've known about it since the 70s. Nobody ever thought to wonder if it was valuable to anyone else." He picked up a handful of black sand and let it fall through his fingers. "They didn't come here for our organs. They came for our light." The copper waves moved. Cole said, "Can we weaponize it?" Rook looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. A small, dry smile. The smile of someone who has spent decades being the smartest person in a room and has learned not to show it. "I can do something better than that," he said. "I can make them want to stop." The plan was not elegant. Mara had been in operations with elegant plans, and she'd been in operations where the plan was a single sentence. "Get there, deal with whatever you find, get out." This was closer to the second kind, with structure added. Celine would go for the infrastructure. Darrow would be her cover. Cole would create the distraction. Rook would handle the countermeasure. Mara would get the 3 survivors out of the harvesting room. "And if any of this goes wrong?" Darrow asked. "Then we improvise," Mara said, "which is something humans are particularly good at." She said it matter-of-factly, not as a rallying speech, as a statement of observed fact. She had improvised her way out of a collapsed building in Afghanistan, out of a firefight in a country she wasn't officially in, out of a hostage situation that had gone wrong in 4 different directions simultaneously. She had improvised so many times that it had become a reflex, the way other people had reflexes for breathing or blinking. What the things in the towers didn't understand, what nothing had ever understood until it was too late, was that humans didn't break when the plan fell apart. They got creative. They moved at what Mara estimated to be local mid-afternoon, when the amber light was low and coming from the side, casting long shadows. Shadows were cover. She'd been using shadows since she was 20 years old. The outer edge of the installation was unguarded. Of course it was. Livestock didn't need guarding, it needed fencing. And the fence here was the copper ocean on one side, and whatever was inland on the other. The creatures hadn't imagined that their livestock would attack. The concept probably didn't exist in their experience. Mara moved through the outer structures with Celine close behind her, both of them staying in shadow. Both of them moving on the balls of their feet in the particular silence of people who had learned that sound was the thing that killed you. The first creature they encountered was alone. It was standing at a junction of 2 cable ways, performing what looked like maintenance, pressing its limb ends against the organic cable, and doing something that made the cable's pulse quicken for a moment before settling. Mara stopped. Celine stopped behind her. The creature hadn't detected them. Its sensory array was facing the cable. She needed it out of the way. Not dead. Killing it would change the emotional temperature of the installation, and she needed the others slow to respond. She needed them to not understand what was happening until it was already over. She picked up a piece of the crystal material from the ground. A fragment, sharp-edged, heavier than it looked. She threw it 20 meters to the creature's left, into the shadow of another structure. The creature turned. Its sensory array focused on the sound. It moved toward it with that slow, confident water movement stride. Mara and Celine went in the other direction. Rook's countermeasure was, at its core, simple. Human cells produced biophotons as a metabolic byproduct. The rate of production varied with cellular activity. It increased with stress, with exertion, with certain chemical stimuli. What Rook had worked out, in the 20 minutes he'd spent sitting against the rock formation apparently doing nothing, was that if you could artificially spike the production rate high enough, the harvesting machines would either overload or, if they had safety mechanisms which sophisticated machines typically did, shut themselves down. He didn't have a laboratory. He didn't have equipment. He had the biochemistry of his own body, 63 years of accumulated knowledge, and the particular kind of problem-solving that comes from spending a long career figuring out how to do things with what you have, rather than what you wish you had. He'd been chewing a specific combination of the vegetation growing at the edge of the installation. Plants that had no earth analog, but that his palate and his instincts identified as metabolic stimulants. Some of it would make him very sick, probably. Some of it was doing what he'd hoped it would do. He could feel it, a warmth in his cells, a hum, like being mildly electrified from the inside. When Cole gave the signal, a sharp whistles, 3 short bursts, which Cole had proposed because it was simple, and because fire crews used whistle signals, and he was comfortable with them. Rook walked into the installation through the opposite entrance and sat down cross-legged in the middle of the main thoroughfare. He didn't try to hide. He sat in full view of the 2 creatures moving through the space and waited. They saw him. They did not react with alarm. He was livestock. Livestock that had wandered, which was unusual but not threatening. One of them moved toward him with that slow, purposeful stride. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly and concentrated on every metabolic process he was aware of. His heartbeat, his digestion, the warmth in his muscles, the chemistry of his blood. And he pushed. He had no word for what he did. He wasn't sure there was a word. But he had spent 63 years living in his own body and understanding it, in a way most people never bothered to. And he knew that attention changed things at the cellular level. That focus was its own kind of chemistry. The creature stopped 3 meters from him. The machines in the main room began to make a sound they hadn't been making before. Cole found the thing he was looking for in the 3rd structure he entered, a storage space containing equipment whose specific function he couldn't determine, but whose basic physical structure he recognized immediately. Pressurized containers. Every substance he'd ever fought, every industrial fire, every chemical blaze, every warehouse that had gone up with the wrong materials inside, had taught him to read pressurized containers the way other people read faces. This one was stressed. He could see it in the slight distension of the casing, the color the material had taken on at the seam. He'd spent 20 years learning that when something was that close to failure, you didn't push it. You controlled the failure. You chose where it went. He set the container's failure point deliberately, using a sharp fragment of crystal that he'd picked up on the way in. Then he moved to a position he'd identified on the way in, a junction of several of the organic cables. A nexus point that Celine had described to him in abstract terms before she'd left. He took 3 slow breaths. He thought about a house fire he'd been in 15 years ago, where everything had gone wrong in the first 60 seconds, and he'd had to navigate a building he'd never been in zero visibility, on instinct and training alone. He thought about how he'd felt coming out of that building. Not triumphant, just exhausted, just glad, just very aware of every breath. He thought, I have been in rooms that wanted to kill me, and I have walked out of all of them. He looked at the container. He pushed it. The controlled failure he'd engineered sent a concussive wave directly into the cable nexus. Not an explosion, nothing so dramatic, more like a shout, an abrupt, violent input that the organic system hadn't been designed to receive. The cables reacted. The pulse changed. The whole installation shuddered once. A deep vibration that Mara felt through the crystal floor of the harvesting room 200 meters away. The 3 people on the tables woke up. They came back into consciousness the way Mara had. In pieces, pain first, then confusion. She was already there. She'd been there for 90 seconds, moving the filaments aside with her bare hands. They were warm and faintly resistant, like pulling a bandage slowly, and running a constant low murmur of narration to the nearest person. A woman, 30s, dark hair, who'd been closest to waking. "You're okay," Mara said. "You're going to be okay, can you hear me?" The woman opened her eyes. They were unfocused for a moment, then cleared. "Can you walk?" The woman sat up. She looked at the filaments. She looked at the machines which were making new sounds now, the sounds of systems under unexpected stress. She looked at Mara. "Yes," she said. This was what Mara loved about people. In the worst possible moment, stripped of context and certainty, and the basic understanding of where they were, someone asked, "Can you walk?" And the answer came back, "Yes, we walk, we keep going." It was the most human thing she knew. She got all three of the unconscious survivors to their feet in under 4 minutes. One of the men couldn't stand on his own. She got under his arm and took his weight without thinking about it. Just adjusted her center of gravity and kept moving. The installation was no longer calm. She could hear it as she moved back through the crystal corridors. A new quality in the air, a vibration that was different from the one she'd felt on the beach. Less rhythmic, more urgent. The creatures were responding. She'd known they would. She'd planned for them too, in the same way she'd planned for every operation she'd ever run. Not hoping the plan would hold, but knowing exactly what she'd do when it didn't. She came out of a side passage and nearly walked into one of the creatures. It was large, up close, larger than she'd estimated from the amphitheater. Its sensory array was oriented directly at her and the person she was supporting, and she felt, without being able to explain why, that she was being appraised. That something behind that featureless face was calculating. For the first time since she'd arrived on the black sand beach, she felt genuine fear. Not the operational fear she was used to, the calibrated, useful kind that sharpened attention and quickened response. This was older, the animal kind. The kind that said, "This thing is different from anything you have ever faced and you do not know what it will do." She kept moving. She kept moving because stopping was a choice, and it was the wrong one. And her body knew that even when her mind was catching up. She adjusted her weight, shifted the man she was supporting, and walked directly past the creature at a distance of less than a meter, maintaining eye contact, or what passed it for it, since the creature had no eyes she could identify, and projecting the specific quality of confidence that said, "I am exactly where I intend to be." The creature did not move. She didn't understand why until later. She thought about it after, pieced it together from what Rook had said, and what she'd seen, and her own instincts. And she thought that maybe the creature's entire framework for understanding the humans it harvested didn't include the category she was representing. It had a category for livestock, it had a category for threat, but it didn't have a category for someone who walked directly toward it and through it and kept moving, someone whose body language said, "I have done harder things than this before breakfast." She came out of the installation and into the amber light. They gathered on the beach, 9 of them, all 9. Mara counted twice and felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have a name for but recognized. The specific relief of an accounting that matched, of everyone present, everyone whole. The installation behind them was changed. The organic cables vibrated at a different frequency. The machines inside were still running, but had the quality of something running wrong. Like an engine firing on fewer cylinders, struggling to maintain a rhythm it had forgotten. Rook was the last to arrive. He walked out of the installation looking slightly yellow and slightly delighted, which Mara found both alarming and reassuring in equal measure. "It'll stabilize," he said, before anyone asked, "eventually, but they'll need time to recalibrate. Whatever I put into their harvesting system, it gave their machines something they weren't set up to process. They weren't expecting that much output." "Will they come after us?" Darrow asked. Everyone looked at Mara. She thought about the creature in the corridor, the way it had stopped, the way it had looked at her, or whatever that featureless appraisal had been, and hadn't moved. She thought about what Cole had said on the beach that morning. "They don't think we're dangerous." "They will eventually," she said. "When they figure out what happened, when they recategorize us." She paused, "But right now they're confused, and confusion is something we can use." She looked at the copper ocean. It lapped at the black sand with its extra syllable, its breathing undercurrent. The 2 moons were clearer now, in the deepening light. "The installation has a communication structure," Celine said. She'd been quiet since they'd assembled, working through something. I saw it when we went in. The organic cables aren't just infrastructure, they're signal carrying. Whatever this installation is reporting back to, it's reporting through those cables. Can we use it to signal for help? The woman Mara had woken on the table asked. Her name, she'd said, was Petra. She was steadier on her feet than she had any right to be. Maybe, Celine said, or we can use it differently. She looked at Mara. If we can generate enough of whatever Rook used, enough biophotonic output, deliberately structured, we might be able to transmit it as a signal. Not a human radio signal. Something they'd recognize as communication. What would we say? Darrow asked. We'd say we know what they want, Mara said slowly, working it out, and we know what they did, and we're capable of doing it again. A threat, Cole said. A statement of capability, Mara said. There's a difference. A threat is about emotion. A statement of capability is about mathematics. You tell them, this is what we can do, and now you have to calculate whether what you get from us is worth what dealing with us costs. Rook was nodding, still yellow, still delighted. The biophotonic signal can be modulated. I can structure it. It'll be crude, like shouting in a language you only half understand, but it'll be coherent enough to carry meaning. Then that's what we do, Mara said. They spent the next hour preparing. It wasn't a gentle hour. Two of the survivors from the tables were still shaky, still working out what had been done to them, and Mara sat with the most affected of them, a young man named Hess, no older than 22, and talked him through it in the flat concrete terms she'd used in field medicine when there was no time for softness and gentleness would come later. She talked about what had happened to his body in a way that respected both what he'd been through and his ability to handle the truth of it. He listened. He steadied. Cole had been gathering materials from the outer edges of the installation, fragments of crystal, lengths of organic cable that had detached in the disruption, things that might be useful and things that might not. He had the instinct of someone who'd never gone into a burning building without knowing at least two ways out, and that instinct mapped directly onto this. Darrow had found something at the edge of the installation, a section of wall that was different from the others, more translucent, with a quality of depth behind it that suggested it wasn't solid. He'd come to Celine with it, and she'd run her hands along it and gone very still. This is an access point, she said. To the cable system. We go in here. They went in there. The space inside the wall was not what any of them had expected. It was large, chamber-sized, with the organic cables running through it in all directions, converging toward a central node that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The bioluminescence was stronger here, and Mara found herself stopping for a moment just to look at it, the beauty of it, the alienness of it, the fact that it was genuinely unlike anything humans had built, and also the fact that beauty was beauty regardless of who made it. She thought, I would have liked to see this under different circumstances. Then she got to work. Rook positioned himself at the central node and began to do whatever he'd been doing before, that focused, internal thing that she still didn't have a word for. Celine connected the detached cable lengths into a rough structure she'd designed on the fly. Cole stood at the chamber entrance in the role he understood best, watching, ready, a one-man early warning system. Petra, it turned out, had been a radio engineer before she had met whatever she was when she'd been brought here. She worked with Rook and Celine to structure the signal. What's the message? Petra asked when the structure was ready. Mara thought about it. She thought about everything she knew about how communication worked. Not diplomatic communication, not the polished language of treaties, but the communication that happened between parties who were trying to understand each other's capabilities in real time. She'd done it across language barriers, across cultural barriers, across the particular barrier of two people who were trying to figure out if they needed to shoot each other. The core of that communication was always the same. Here is what I am. Here is what I can do. Here is what I want. What do you want? We know what you came for, she said slowly. We can produce it. We can produce it deliberately, at higher rates than you've seen. But we won't be harvested. We won't be taken. If you want access to what we have, you'll deal with us directly, not as livestock, as a party with standing. Petra was already translating this into something the cable structure could carry, patterns and signal, rhythms that corresponded to concepts, crude and imprecise but structured. Rook's cellular output gave it the substrate it needed. The biophotonic light that the machines had been designed to collect, now shaped intentionally into something that carried more than raw material. A message, the first one humanity had ever sent to this particular audience. The cable node pulsed, once, twice, then with a quality that was different from its baseline. A new rhythm, intentional, carrying what Mara hoped was coherent meaning into whatever communication network these structures were connected to. They waited. The response came in 20 minutes. Not in language, not in anything Mara could parse directly, but the character of the installation changed. A settling of the vibration, a change in the quality of the light, a shift that Celine described as like a building resettling after a load is redistributed. And the creatures which had been moving through the installation with the urgent quality of systems under stress, stopped, went still, their sensory arrays oriented outward toward the chamber, not in threat. Mara read body language the way she read terrain, automatically, analytically, and this was not aggressive posture. This was the posture of appraisal, of recalculation, of something that had made an assumption and discovered it was wrong. She stood at the entrance to the chamber. She put Cole at her right, because he was steady and large and communicated solidity. She put Rook at her left, still glowing faintly in the bioluminescent light, the old chemist who had outthought an alien harvesting machine with 60 years of self-knowledge and a handful of alien vegetation. She stood up straight. She had stood in front of superior officers who thought she didn't belong in the room. She had stood in front of hostile parties who were calculating whether she was worth the trouble. She had stood in the wreckage of plans gone wrong and looked at the situation and identified what there was to work with. This was all of those things at once. This was also something that had never happened before. She met the sensory arrays of the nearest creature, whatever met was, for things that had no eyes she recognized, and she held it. She did not smile. She did not project aggression. She projected the thing that had carried her through 16 years of situations that should have ended her. The clear, grounded, absolutely unshakable conviction that she was still here, that she was still standing, and that she intended to go on standing. The creature made a sound. She felt it in her bones rather than hearing it with her ears. Low, structured, carrying in it, somehow in a way she couldn't explain, a quality of acknowledgement. Darrow, at the back of the group, let out a breath that he'd apparently been holding for some time. "What does that mean?" Petra asked quietly. Rook said, "I think it means we're no longer livestock." They were on the island for 3 more days. Not comfortable days, not easy days. Days of slow, cautious, mutual investigation between parties who were learning each other's categories in real time, filling in blanks, making and correcting mistakes. There were moments that felt like progress, and moments that felt like standing on the edge of something that could go entirely wrong. But the harvesting machines stayed dark, and the creatures, they learned to think of them as the architects. Because the installation was clearly their work and their purpose, and naming things was how humans organized the world. Approached the 9 survivors with a quality that was the alien equivalent of carefulness, which was not warmth, but it was something. Rook and Petra built a communication structure over those 3 days, working with the cable system, and with Celine's engineering instincts, and with Mara's hard-edged patience. It was crude. It was imprecise. There were things that simply could not be conveyed in either direction, because the conceptual frameworks were too different. But some things crossed. The architects had come from a long way away. The biophotonic output of human cells was, to them, something like fuel. Not something predatory in the way parasitism was predatory, but a genuine resource, the way humans harvested timber or solar energy. They had not classified humans as people, because they had never encountered anything that looked like humans, which was, in fact, people. Their entire history of encountering what they called, roughly translated by Rook with some uncertainty, the biological substrate of other worlds had been encounters with things that did not communicate, did not plan, did not respond to their presence with calculated action. They had come to collect. They had found something else. "They're frightened," Rook said on the 2nd day. Not frightened the way a person was frightened, he clarified. More the way an equation was frightened when a variable it hadn't accounted for showed up on the wrong side of the equal sign. "Good," Cole said. "Not necessarily good," Rook said. "A frightened equation might resolve itself in ways we don't want." But on the 3rd day, when the Sci-Fi came to the final version of their message, the clearest, most carefully structured version, the one Petra had spent 18 hours refining, it carried something that even Mara, who was not a scientist and not a diplomat, and not anything except a person who was very difficult to stop, could feel in the quality of the light through the cable node. Not agreement, not friendship, not anything that mapped neatly onto human concepts of negotiation, but acknowledgement and an absence. The harvesting machines did not come back online. They found the ship on the fourth morning. It was at the inland edge of the island, concealed by terrain she hadn't explored. A vessel that was to human spacecraft what the installation was to human architecture. Recognizable in function, alien in every particular. She stood at the edge of the rise and looked down at it and felt the specific vertigo of being exactly where history pivoted. "They're letting us leave," Celine said. "Yes," Mara said. "Why?" She thought about the creature in the corridor who hadn't moved. She thought about the cable node pulsing with their message. She thought about 9 people on a black sand beach deciding that confusion was something they could use. "Because we changed the calculation," she said. "We're not the resource they came for anymore. We're the unknown variable. And the unknown variable is always the one you have to reconsider." Cole was already moving down toward the ship. The others followed. Darrow, Celine, Petra, the 3 survivors from the tables. Steadier now. Hess walking on his own with the careful gait of someone reclaiming something. And Rook, who walked last as he'd walked through everything. At his own pace, with his own quiet attention to the world. The ship's entry opened as they approached. An acknowledgement of intent. It knew where to go, or it had been set to know, which amounted to the same thing. Mara was the last to board. She stood at the entry for a moment and looked back at the installation. The creatures moved through it at their usual deliberate pace, unchanged on the surface. But she understood now that something in their fundamental categories had shifted. A slot had been added where there had been none, a new variable. She thought about the first people who had looked at fire and decided to pick it up. She thought about the first person who had decided to stand between something dangerous and everything they loved and say, "No further." She thought about the fact that the most dangerous thing in the universe was not the thing with the biggest weapon or the most sophisticated technology. It was the thing that refused to believe the situation was hopeless and kept working the problem until it wasn't. She stepped inside, the ship sealed behind her. And the stars, wrong stars, unfamiliar constellations, the sky of somewhere very far from home, filled the forward viewport as the vessel lifted, and Mara Voss, who was very hard to stop, went to find her way back.